Today on the Student Slant, we go sans guest and talk about a semester spent as a student beat reporter.
So earlier this summer, about August, we got an email from our practicum instructor, Spencer Hunt, about picking beats that we'd like, and we had to send him our top four. And I was in Boston with my family, and I got the email, and I was like asking around to my mom and my dad, and my brother, and I was like, what should I do? What would be good for me? And they're like, well, that's kind of your decision. So I went through all of them. There was several beats to pick from, and I decided to just go number one, comedy and theater. Number two, health and fitness. And number three, men's basketball. And for my fourth one, I was like, I used to be a computer science and engineering major. I know some about tech. I like video games a lot. I'll put that as my fourth one. It's kind of a throwaway. Sure, science, med, tech, and research. And that's the one I ended up being given. And later, I come to find out that not many people ever pick that as their beat. So that's kind of why they saw someone actually put that as their top four and they gave it to me. I'm Jake Ray.
I'm Zach Varda, and this is the Student Slant. So we're a semester and now, wrapping up our semester. We've talked to a lot of people this semester about their experiences reporting their beats, so this is kind of our chance. No guests this week, just kind of have a chat about what it's like being a student, juggling that with having a beat. You have a very interesting beat. I've given you a lot of slack this year for saying that your beat was made up, that your stories that you could just make them up and nobody would know the difference. And I say that because they are very technical stories. Definitely know their beats have to deal with that. So I guess what's that experience been like just in general? Like you're a journalism student, but like for your stories, you have to like for a week be a biology student, like for a week be a physics student, and figure out how electrons are leaving atoms. So what it's been like taking these concepts and boiling it down to an article.
Yeah, it's hard at times, definitely. Trying to figure out certain things. The last article I wrote was about potatoes, and there was vitamin E, higher vitamin E to help vitamin E deficiencies in some less developed countries. And one of the causes of vitamin E deficiency is oxidative stress. And I had no idea what oxidative stress was. So basically, you said I had to be a biology student or like a chemical student or something like that. But really, it's just going to Google and trying to figure out how someone would explain it that wasn't so technical and trying to just take what people give me, for example, like with an electron leaving an atom, and I can tell you that, and you say, "Oh, wow, that sounds kind of cool," but it's really taking that information and then moving it into something that people can understand and explaining to them why it's such a big discovery. It's less taking in big things, and they always talk about how, as a science reporter, you have to translate things and stuff like that, but it's less actually translating what something is and explaining what something does and why it is like effective to you as just a reader. On the other side, you do politics, and I always give you a ton of issue with certain things, saying that no one wants to read, it's dry, it's overdone, and we're so oversaturated with it right now. But you take a lot of stories that are large issues that are the whole nation, and you somehow find a way to localize it. So, what is it like having to always take stories that are so big, even just like the Columbus area, and localizing it to something that a student would read and be like, "Oh, I actually understand this as a student, and this is how this affects me, and I need to be aware."
So, well, for starters, unlike you, politics was my first beat choice. I didn't like, you know, have to. It didn't go down the line. I'm a political junkie, so like the process of doing it's easy for me. Like I don't ever be like, oh, I don't want to write this. Like I love every story I write. Some are dry and boring.
Yeah, same.
Yeah, it's hard. I guess sometimes it is hard to boil it down to like why a campus student should care. So like I did a piece on the tax reform now, and like I mean, most college students probably aren't filing taxes. At most, they're doing like a 10W-40. Like that's takes like what 2 minutes to fill out. Like they're not writing off mortgages. So, but I guess the lawmakers helped me out, and they made a very controversial part of the bill about how grad students are taxed. So that was helpful. I guess it's just, for me, it's finding the right people to talk to that students will care about. I think my most reliable source has been Niraj Antani. He's a state rep in the Ohio House of Representatives. He's only, I think, 26 still. Ohio State alumni. Went here, was college Republican president, youngest ever member of the House, or youngest current member. Pretty sure youngest ever. So that's someone I found that students can connect with because, like, he was just here talking to members of groups on campus. But to get back to your original question, I guess just it is a challenge for me because, like, I'm a political junkie. I read Washington Post, New York Times every day, and I have to remember, like, most of my readers aren't like that, so I need to tell them why it's important to them here on the Ohio State campus. So I guess volleying back to you, you do a lot of research, I guess, like, kind of with your stories. How is that juggling that? And you have, like, probably longer interviews than I have, where you have to go to go to actual labs. So how's that juggling that with, like, oh, I'm also a student. Like, I need to go to, like, for you, I need to go to my Japanese class, like, and that's a heavy class. Like, so I need to go to my Japanese class, but then I need to go, like, basically get lectured by a researcher at this lab across campus. How's that, like, time management wise?
Uh, Time management wise, I guess it's not too bad with trying to juggle classes and these interviews, but it is like when I schedule these interviews, I have to schedule out about a class period to go to talk to some of these professors. And another issue along with that, time management wise, is when you're talking to them, sometimes it does turn into a lecture and less of an interview, and that's where it becomes difficult to ask questions that would bring out a more emotional human response that is really important for a story, and less just put the facts down on the paper. Because yeah, it'd be great if I wrote in a journal or a science journal about what you're doing, what your research is, how is this going to affect and your processes in the lab and everything like that. Yeah, that's great. But when I want to tell my roommate or a friend, I'm not going to tell them about how, oh, you have again with the potatoes, you have a potato that you'd put in a test tube, you simulate saliva, you do all this, then you centrifuge it and do everything going through your whole digestive tract. I'm not going to write that into the article. I'm going to write about how this is going to help people who are hungry in some nations. It's going to help people who have or who are having children, and how it's going to help these children survive even better. So it's really taking that time management aspect to get that lecture, but also find a way to break it down like after their lecture to get an emotional response. So back to, I guess, again, back to your original question, going a little bit off the topic. It's not too bad. Most professors who are researchers as well are also on a very tight schedule, so sometimes there's conflict. But so far this year, I've never found a really big issue where I have to miss like a major class or am so strapped for time that I can't do an interview. I'll always get the interview in some way or somehow with either phone or email in some cases, even though that's not the best case. But and I mean, same question for you though. How do you manage time when the State House isn't on Ohio State's campus? You have to go down to Columbus sometimes. Like you actually have to go downtown, or there'll be a protest and that's your beat. You have to cover it. It's not like I'm never gonna have like a spur of the moment thing unless someone is like hired or fired that I would have to drop the ball and go to. You have if there's a protest, you have to go immediately.
Gonna have to ask my professors to cover their ears for the next 10 seconds. I've skipped a good amount of my classes this semester. Latin is a 8 a.m. class for me, and sometimes it's an 8 a.m. on a Wednesday, and the State House likes to do things at 10 a.m. on Wednesdays. Couldn't explain it to you. Just about everything that happens down there is 10 a.m. on a Wednesday. Does not leave me enough time to go to my 8 a.m. class and get down there. Yes, that's been I guess that's been a problem with my beat. I've skipped a lot of classes. It hasn't affected my grades so far. Yeah, it's been interesting because like I can't call the State House and be like, that's not fit my schedule. Could we like move some things around? Like, so that's been an interesting thing. Protests, you know, protests not so much. Great thing about protests is a lot of protests are young student-driven things, so they also have classes, and they tend to schedule those at night. But yeah, it's been interesting. trying to talk to state reps. They have busy schedules. Sometimes my interviews are like, look, you literally have 5 minutes, like on the phone with them, and you're going through a comm team or whatever, and that can be frustrating. So yeah, it's been interesting. Definitely forced me to skip classes, move around my schedule, miss events that I had planned on going to because all of a sudden, Trump tweeted something or, the House passed something and I have to go cover that. So looking back on we got a semester worth of podcasts under our belt, which is pretty mind blowing. As like a podcast junkie, like that I've recorded now, like, you know, we have 9 out at the time of this recording, but we've got like 12 recorded. So looking back, we talked to photo editors or a photo editor. We talked to Riss, and that's I've seen very closely your struggle with photos because you have an interesting beat. Like, how do you show? You can't take a photo of electrons. Like scientists can barely do that. Jake Ray's not walking in there and like taking over the super high powered microscope and be like, hold on a second, gonna need to borrow your equipment and take a picture for my story. So, how has that challenge been? Like you said, you have the challenge of trying to involve a human element. Well, now you also need a visual element. So, what's that been like for you?
With some cases, the electron case, a diagram had to be done. Like it was just there was no other choice. But for the most part, I can reach out to professor and say, "Hey, do you have any pictures from during your research or what you were looking at?" And they normally can supply those. I've had to take some of my own, and then those cases are easy. But with the cases that aren't easy, we have to get very creative. The photo editors and I have sat down, I think, with 2 or 3 stories to decide something to do. A lot had ended up being just a headshot of the researcher. For one example, we did a article on a professor who was talking about how if you focus on your failures, they actually had a study that showed that if you actually focus on them and take that emotional response and don't just say like, "Oh, we'll get them next time," but actually feel sad and bad about it, then you'll actually be better next time. So for that, we were like, how do we show this picture? Can we just have someone who looks sad or something like that, or someone who looks now that they're succeeding? That was a little tough. So at the end, we ended just having to do her headshot, which worked out. I mean, it was a good professional photo, but yeah, it then did not capture uh like the emotion of the story the way a photo is supposed to be a supplement. The same kind of for you though, not maybe that there isn't a photo that exists, but do you ever have a hard time finding, I guess, an exciting photo that would capture a reader's eye that they would be reading the paper and be like, "Oh wow, this photo's amazing. I need to read this."
So I feel like my beat is either perfect for photos or absolutely terrible for photos. So like I did in a story this semester. A group opposing abortion went outside Sherrod Brown's office, who's our Democratic senator here in Ohio, and they have this truck with baby socks, one for like every abortion to represent like lives taken, and that's already a great photo opportunity because like there's this group making this, and then counter protesters show up that support like Planned Parenthood. They're not affiliated with Planned Parenthood, but they support it, and they show up, and you know anybody that's ever been around a protest around a heated issue like that, just people acting crazy, yelling at each other. So fantastic photo. And on top of that, I had I had our Lantern TV editor down there with me, so I had someone who's much better at taking photos than I am. So it all worked. That one all worked out fantastically. On the flip side, just wrote a story about a proposal, a joint resolution in the Ohio House about how issues get on the ballot. So I'll go into the minutia. Basically, what it boils down to is, hey, this piece of legislation that could affect you just got introduced. Well, that's great. What am I going to do? Take a picture of a piece of legislation? Like, that's extremely boring. And we tossed it around, and I mean, we ended up going with the headshot of the representative. And I guess it's kind of cool because he used to go to Ohio State. It's Niraj, like I mentioned earlier. So that's neat. But yeah, not ideal. Not gonna catch anybody's eye. So it's a challenge sometimes. So as we're kind of winding down here, looking over at the clock, yeah, we got a little bit of time left. Okay. So, winding down. This is gonna be a cliche question, but I'm gonna put a spin on it. So, what's like your favorite or best story you've written this year, with the caveat that it encapsulates what it means to be a student journalist? So, like, we could sit here and talk about, oh, well, this story I thought was the best because of its impact or what it meant to the campus community. But that's not really bringing out what this podcast is supposed to be, which is unique to student journalism. So, what's your best article that you think encapsulates the best everything it means to be a student journalist?
Uh, so I guess I would say the article I wrote about the new Apple initiative coming to Ohio State and really what students are going to need to expect out of this. I did an article previous to that about um, what maybe two professors thought, some against, some for, to just show kind of how this isn't like just a ho hum topic and everybody's happy about getting an iPad. But this article I feel like really helped students to realize, yeah, it's great that people are getting iPads and we're going to be a more technical campus, but what is this really going to do for you? In the fact that if you're not a freshman, you're not going to have an iPad, but there may be some classes that if you do have an iPad, you can be part of. And there may be some building updates. And there also is an update to how students are expected to see things. So you might have a possibility to learn coding as a student, even though you're not like a computer science major or technology major. They still want to push that onto everyone because it just would make a more technical savvy student coming out of college. So that one I feel like had the most benefit from a for students and from a student journalist. I feel like I had that opportunity just because I'm at Ohio State. It's the initiative for them. Apple wants to do it with us, and I'm the tech beat, and that's just I had to grab that story and take it because it was my story. So that was like the best opportunity I had to give students a look at what's going to affect them as students and helped me the most as a student journalist. What about you?
Mine was definitely I wrote about campus free speech, and obviously like super hot topic the last years. Yeah, I guess a year because even going back to the election, you had people who felt like they couldn't be Trump supporters on campus, and now you have like Richard Spencer wanted to come to Ohio State. It's been I think 3 times now he's been denied. But anyway, so I was able to talk to again, Naraji Antani, like third time, man. He's getting super shout out in this podcast. Had to talk to him, and I talked to him about like now he's a state rep, but he was just here and his experiences with free speech on campus. Talked to Nick Davis, the president of Students for Trump, and then also talked to the president of one of our socialist groups here. I just got to get some great campus perspectives on like the First Amendment, hate speech, that the perspectives that probably would have been hard to get if I wasn't like a student journalist, like, you know, for good, I would say for good reason. Student for Trump groups are a little skeptical, I think, of the media, but we have a pretty good relationship with Nick Davis. So I was able to get him to come talk about it and what it's like being a student for Trump president on a campus. Able to, I had already kind of had a working relationship with the president of the socialist group. And I think that article, ended up being like 1,000 words, maybe a little bit over, and it gave me a chance to really dive into a topic that's unique to a campus. And as a student journalist, what I gained from it was being able to have a story with multiple sources, like, a good amount of sources, use my connections being on a campus, and really write something that is immediately like not impactful, but immediately something students can identify when they pick up the lantern, as opposed to, like you said, I try to localize a lot of things. I didn't have to localize this. The story was local. So it was a fantastic story to write because people can pick it up and immediately go, oh, this applies to me.
That was a great discussion. Join us next week on the Student Slant for more student perspective.